I'm really excited to finally introduce everyone to the Samar Audio MF08 microphone, the first introduction in their brand new Omni8 line of microphones. This has been a long time coming. Mark has been tinkering and playing with this design for over 20 years at this point, so it's really amazing to finally see this come into fruition. In a minute, we're going to do a bit more deep diving into what makes this different and why Mark is choosing to approach all of this in the way he is. But right now, I just want to give you kind of a quick overview and Cliff Notes version of what's going on to start out. The MF08 is a hybrid microphone system, and it's multi-pattern. Now, right now, you're hearing me speaking cardioid, and that's because Mark has put a pressure omni element in here, as well as one of his ribbon mic elements in here. And they're combined level-wise and everything to make up a cardioid pattern, because mathematically, when you combine an omni signal with a figure 8 signal, as you start to add in figure 8 into omni, it shifts that overall pattern into a cardioid pattern. So you're hearing the pressure omni and the ribbon level matched to give you a perfect cardioid pattern right now. And this is multi-pattern. You can go anywhere from full omni to full figure 8 to cardioid to anywhere in between. So again, you're hearing me speaking cardioid right now, a mix between the pressure omni and the ribbon element. Now I'm going to shift the mic into full omni. Now you're hearing me speak through the MF08 in full omni. So at this point, you're only hearing the pressure omni microphone. Now, this is a bit different than all the other pressure omnis you're going to see on the market, because this one's actually transformer based. And to our knowledge at this point, there's not any true pressure omni microphones that are transformer based. And this is one of the things I really love about Samar Audio and Mark's kind of design philosophy. He really likes microphones that are full frequency but flat, that pick up a lot of detail, and his pressure omni design is no exception. This is probably one of the very few pressure omni microphones that I've ever used where I actually really loved it. I don't think the others that I've heard at this point are bad by any means, but just for my preference, it's really interesting to hear omni kind of in a completely flat frequency response. Hear a lot of detail from that, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like sterile to me. That transformer based output really helps. Really great sounding pressure omni. So you're hearing me in full omni right now. Now I'm going to shift the mic over to full figure 8 so you can hear just the ribbon element. Now you're hearing the MF08 in the full ribbon mode. This is very similar to Mark's VL37 active design, because this is a phantom powered microphone. So when you're in the full ribbon mode, it is active. Mark has done some stuff to voice the ribbon side just a bit differently, and we'll get to that later. But overall, I just wanted to let you hear kind of the full spectrum of sound you can get from this microphone, because not only can you think of it as a multi-pattern mic, but as you shift into those patterns, figure 8 is done via ribbon, which is a very true natural figure 8. The omni side is done pressure omni, so it is a true natural omni, and you're deriving cardioid in a very natural way as well by combining those two. Mark's ribbon mics are just like the omni design, They're very flat overall. They're not hyped in any way. They pick up a lot of detail. So when we shift back to cardioid, now we're back to that mix between the omni and the figure 8 to get cardioid. So again, you can think of this not only as a multi-pattern mic, but as you shift into those different patterns, you get some, I would say, extreme tonalities. But the interesting thing is when you go between full omni and full figure 8, you can still tell that they're in the same family, and it's not a massive difference, but you can really think of this as having the ability to have a full figure 8 ribbon microphone, a full pressure omni microphone, are a hybrid cardioid. It's a pretty interesting system. So that's kind of our crash course and a quick overview so you can understand what's going on. Now let's start deep diving into some of the technicals and kind of look into what sets this apart from more traditional microphone designs that are deriving multi-patterns. Before we start to go into more detail on Samar Audio's Omni8 line and kind of design philosophy, I just wanted to take a minute to look at two typically designed kind of more traditional microphone capsule designs, how they've gotten to a cardioid pattern and then moved on to being able to do multi-pattern microphones from one capsule. By the way, these are two of my favorite microphones I use all the time in the studio. I wanted to bring these in because I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm bashing traditional microphone designs, but I do want to stress why Samar is doing it the way they are and why the old way and more traditional way of doing this, although it sounds really great and we've got some amazing examples, there are some issues with doing it the way that we've done it forever. So right now you're hearing me talk through my Chandler TG Type L. This is a cardioid microphone, large cap cardioid microphone, and that's it. It is just infixed cardioid. And what you'll find with pretty much every large cap fixed cardioid microphone is that they had to kind of mechanically manipulate how they made that capsule to make it cardioid. And like in this case, you probably had to do some things to chamber it, because if you just stretch a membrane around a capsule and it's closed back, more than likely you're going to just right out of the gate get a very omni pattern out of that design. So when you make a capsule that needs to be in fixed cardioid, it has to be chambered certain ways and voiced in order to get a good sounding cardioid pattern. So that's how everyone has done it in the past. That's how you will see the majority of microphones designed, and there's lots of different ways you can design capsules. Let's switch over to the Vanguard V14. This is a really special mic. I got to be part of the design process in this towards the end of the process. This is more or less a C12 design mic, and people think very highly of that design, and for good measure. It's a great sounding microphone. This is multi-pattern, and right now you're hearing me speak into the V14 with the omni pattern engaged. When you have a microphone capsule and you need to make it multi-pattern, the way you get omni is that you basically put a membrane on the front and the back of the microphone, and there's a little bit of space between those two membranes just because of the physical limitations of how close you can get things. You have to voice it the same way with different back plates and ventings and a bunch of technical stuff that we don't need to get into for this purpose. But the way that we're deriving omni in the V14 right now is combining that front and back capsule that are on one capsule plate, more or less. So right now I'm going to take the mic and we're going to move it into figure 8. And since this is a tube mic, I picked it because, as you'll hear, it's actually going to take it a minute for it to actually shift from true omni to figure 8. And you'll kind of start to hear my voice probably sound a little less open on top, and you'll start to hear a bigger proximity effect as it moves into figure 8. So obviously there is nothing wrong with designing mics like this. We've been doing this forever. This is well established. There are a few small inherent issues with doing this. Frequency response can be a big one. Just because you start shifting a multi-pattern mic into cardioid with different combinations of those front and back plates doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a true cardioid pattern throughout the whole frequency range. And in most cases, you'll find that most multi-pattern mics like this, when you shift it into cardioid, the lower frequencies are actually more omni than the higher frequencies. And that's just an inherent issue that's just baked into designing mics this way. And you also run into a bunch of just linear distortion issues and some other things. Now, Obviously, you know, the distortion word, that isn't always a bad thing. We get distortion in tube mics and we love it. So although those are inherent design issues that you have to be conscious about when you design a mic that way, as you'll see in a minute, the approach that Samar's taking with the Omni8 line of microphones kind of avoids all these inherent issues with designing mics this way. So not to say that these sound bad by any means. Amazing sounding mics, but in Samar Audio's opinion and Mark's opinion, and from just a technical standpoint, on paper there should be a better way to do this and still make it sound amazing. Now that we have a basic understanding of how the Samar MF08 works, and we've gone over some of the just inherent issues when you try to design multi-pattern mics in the more traditional way that we've always done it, now we can kind of start to break down how the MF08 works in a little bit more detail. So what I've assembled right here is more or less a DIY version of the MF08 using two Samar microphones. This first black one right here is not released yet. You'll probably hear some release news on this after the MF08 is out in the world, but this is basically the pressure omni side of the MF08. It's a pressure omni capsule and it's in a transformer-based body. So, great mic, you'll hear more about this later. This is just a prototype of it right now. And then next to it is the VL37A, the active version of Mark's ribbon mic. So, this again is very simplified, but more or less, this is how the MF08 works. You have the pressure omni side and you have the ribbon side. And it's much more complicated than that, but just for starting out, this is how the MF08 works, more or less. Right now you're hearing it in a cardioid pattern, so I basically level match these and turn them up to where we can get cardioid. And to show you that, right now the ribbon is facing with the positive side facing me, the front, and the back is negative. What I'm going to do in a second is I'm not going to change the level on either of these mics, but I'm going to flip the polarity on just the ribbon mic, just the VL37A, and you're going to hear a huge level drop. So let's flip the phase on here. Now that I've flipped the phase, you can hear that there is a big level drop. Let's flip the phase again. And now we're back to full level. Now what just happened? When I flipped the phase on the VL37A, it basically made the front of this the negative leaning side of the polarity. So when this was positive, the Omni capsule was positive, and this was negative facing me, that would have been the equivalent of me walking around to the back of the mic. Omni picks up everywhere, so it doesn't care where you are, and especially pressure Omni, you know. We didn't have to do anything to this microphone capsule in terms of the voicing or anything to make it active. The way that pressure Omni capsules work is they are just naturally in Omni, and you don't have to do anything to voice them that way. So there's none of those inherent drawbacks that we talked about in the more traditional mics that are multi-pattern, where, for instance, when you have a large capsule, you've got that front membrane on the front of it and the back membrane, and you're adding those both together to get Omni. And you know, there are some inherent issues doing it that way. Pressure Omni is just in Omni naturally, so you get a nice linear flat response from it when you design a pressure Omni capsule like this. So again, when I flipped the phase on the VL37A, that was the equivalent of me walking around to the back of the mic, because all of a sudden we told the ribbon mic, okay, the back is now the positive leaning part of the polarity. So we basically just flipped that mic around to the back, because figure 8 picks up from the front and the back. And very similar to all the things I just told you about pressure Omni, ribbon mics are just naturally in figure 8, because you have that very tiny, you know, piece of material suspended that's very, very thin, like very paper hair thin, inside of a magnetic field. When you walk around to the side of a ribbon mic, you know, you have nulls on the side, you have nulls on the top and the bottom. Ribbon mics are just naturally in figure 8 by design, so you don't have to do any of those weird things, and you don't get any of the drawbacks that you get from deriving figure 8 from a dual diaphragm capsule. So we have a pressure omni that is naturally an omni and is happy being there naturally. We didn't have to do anything weird to it to get to that point. Same with the ribbon mic. So we've taken two mics that are in omni and figure eight that are just deriving those patterns in a very natural way. We didn't have to do anything mechanically to shift those patterns. So we have natural omni, natural figure eight. Adding them together, they shift into a very natural cardioid without us having to do anything mechanically, which is kind of at the heart of this design. We have derived cardioid in probably the most, natural way that we can without having to do anything mechanical to shift a capsule or anything into cardioid. So one more time, let's just go ahead and flip the phase on this so that you can hear it. So now that we've flipped the phase, again, that's the equivalent of me walking around to the back of the mic so that you can really hear that when you add these two patterns together, they are in cardioid because cardioid picks up from the front. So more or less, we've turned this microphone around and now I'm speaking from the back. Let's turn the phase off again. Now we're back in cardioid. So let's go ahead and mute the ribbon real quick. Now you're just hearing me speak through the Omni microphone. This is very, very close to the microphone that you will get in the MF08 if you turn it all the way to Omni. There are a few small differences because this was not as simple with the design of the MF08. It was not as simple as just putting an Omni mic next to a ribbon mic and calling it a day. Much more complicated than that. Lots of design issues that had to be overcome, but more than that, inside of the MF08, the Omni capsule and the figure eight ribbon both had to be voiced to work together in a perfect way. You'll see, I'm still speaking with just the Omni capsule engaged, but you'll see that these are very close together. I basically moved these two capsules as close as we could get them. It sounds pretty good when they're together, but there are still some very small phase issues because they are not perfectly phase aligned because there's a little bit of distance. For instance, one of the really cool things that Mark did with the MF08 was he redesigned the magnet structure around the ribbon so that he was able to make a small gap to get that Omni capsule right next to the ribbon and get them so close that all of the phase issues that ended up happening between those two capsules, it shifted it up so far up the frequency range that I think Mark said now that any phase anomalies that we're getting are well past like 22,000 hertz. Very cool. So on paper, any of the issues that we have between two capsules and any phase issues, because of how close Mark was able to get these together, it shifted it up so far up the frequency range that it's not going to be an audible issue. So that's really awesome. Another thing that Mark did was that he actually did some things mechanically just to revoice the ribbon part of this to work better with the Omni capsule. Because let's jump over to the ribbon right now, actually. Now you're hearing me speak through the VL37A, just the ribbon part. So obviously with ribbons, you get a huge proximity effect. The high end starts to, gradually roll off on ribbons. That's just the nature of the design. With the VL37A, it's going to sound slightly different than the ribbon element inside of the MF08, and that's because Mark tweaked it to work with the Omni capsule a little better. With the way these work, right on the frequency spectrum where the ribbon part starts to roll off naturally is right around the point where the Omni capsule starts to naturally come back in when you're in cardioid. So when you're in cardioid, again, because of how both of these mics capsules have been voiced customly inside of the MF08, you end up with a very linear frequency response when you're in cardioid. there is a lot more to this, and there's some things that Mark hasn't even told me. This is just, there's a lot of proprietary technology built into the MF08 that's just kind of Mark's special stuff, so to say. So that's kind of, that goes a little bit deeper into what all was involved with the M08, but it's much more than that. And there's stuff that I'm not even going to talk about because even I don't know, you know. Everybody has to have their secrets and how they do their mic especially. But with all those considerations, I just wanted everyone to understand that the MF08 is not simply just an Omni capsule with a figure 8, you know, ribbon next to it, and you can shift between them. Tons of other considerations went into voicing this mic correctly. Where to place the Omni capsule. Again, Mark has been working on this design for over 20 years, so he has really thought this out. He's gone through a lot of prototypes over the years. He was here for a week earlier this year here at Mill Sounds, and we did some final checks and did some final changes and stuff, and, you know, thought through a bunch of things. I think we actually decided to make it multi-pattern last minute, and so that was a whole nother considerations when Mark decided to do that. You know, that changed a lot of the design aspects, but it's much more complicated than just having an Omni capsule next to a figure 8 ribbon. They are custom voiced inside of the MF08 to work together perfectly when you're in cardioid to give you that flat frequency response. And again, the coolest thing is, you can either think of it as having a multi-pattern hybrid ribbon microphone. You can also not even think about the patterns and just, you know, forget the patterns. Just think of all the voicing things you can do. So let's move to an acoustic guitar and actually look at some voicing stuff we can do with the MF08. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways to think about the MF08 and how you can use it and change sounds. I know Mark's biggest thing that he wanted to accomplish with the MF08 design was to get true cardioid, and so that obviously sounds great. I know you can change the patterns on here and move it, you know, omni, figure 8, cardioid, or anywhere between. That's great, but as a mindset, I would also encourage people to stop thinking about it as changing the pattern all the time necessarily and think about it as a tone shaping option. So in this example, I have a very low tuned acoustic guitar with some older strings on it, and I'm going to play a really resonant kind of boomy part. I've started out with the MF08 all the way in omni because I think my biggest concern for this part was losing kind of the tonality of it, and that being just the resonance in the low end and how low this guitar was. I was worried that was going to kind of, you know, be a little overbearing and you wouldn't be able to hear the notes as well. So let's start with it in omnidirectional and hear how that sounds. So it's all the way in omni. So we're only using the pressure omni element. So that's exactly what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to make sure that there wasn't a huge buildup in the low-end resonance and that we could still hear the notes very clearly. But, however, I think I would like just a little bit more body and low end out of this recording. And so with Omni, unfortunately, there isn't a huge proximity effect, so you're kind of stuck if you're just on a pressure Omni with, if you move it closer, it's going to change the tonality, but you're not necessarily going to pick up more low end like you would with the mic and cardioid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it in Omni again, and then I'm going to shift that pattern just a little bit more in the cardioid direction to where in reality, we're just adding a little bit of the ribbon into the mix. So let me play in Omni again, then I'll mix in just a little bit of the ribbon. Okay, let's add in a little bit of ribbon. And just with a little turn of the dial, I have exactly what I need to move forward with this guitar part. So let me play it for you again in this position where I've moved a little bit more towards cardioid and added in a little bit of the ribbon element. And then we'll go back to full omni so you can hear the difference going the other way. Sounds warm, still sounds present, and that resonance isn't getting in the way like it was when I'm listening to just the instrument in the room. So let's move it back to full omni. Was an easy way just to add a little bit of warmth and body, which quite honestly, that probably would have been impossible if it was just the pressure omni. It would have been harder to move that mic and retain the tonality of the tone that I got, moving it back and moving it in this position. Even moving it forward in full omni probably wouldn't have added a lot of low end, and it would have changed the tonality a little too much for my liking. So tone shaping, in this case, we started with the brighter omni, added in a little bit of ribbon just last minute to add a little bit more body back into things. Let's jump to the other end of the sonic spectrum now. This is my Gryphon high tune 12-string guitar. It's got unison strings instead of octave strings, and it's tuned really high, so you could almost think of this as a mandolin. More or less. I call it the mandolin on steroids, but I oftentimes find myself recording the Gryphon with ribbon mics because it always sounds like it just needs a little bit more body added into it when you put most mics in front of it. So ribbons add a lot of body, and it can sound a little harsh on the high end sometimes, so the ribbons tend to round off that harshness. I have the MF08 set all the way over in ribbon mode as a starting point. So we're just hearing the ribbon element in figure 8. Let's take a listen to that. Okay, obviously, it's added a lot of amazing body to this thing. Definitely more than it has in real life. It sounds a lot thinner in real life, but man, that proximity effect from the ribbon's really adding something nice. I feel like I'm just losing a little bit of the tone, though. The body's there, but it just sounds a little slightly muddy and just not defined enough to me. I could easily kind of shift the mic back a little bit, but I like the body that I'm getting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to shift it out of figure 8, and I'm going to start to shift it back towards cardioid a little bit. A few things are going to happen. Since we start shifting towards cardioid, we're starting to add in a little bit of that pressure omni capsule that's going to add some brightness to it. The other thing that's going to happen is when you listen to this in fully figure 8 and we start to shift it more towards cardioid, we're going to lose a little bit of that low end and the proximity effect. That's going to start to get rolled off a little bit as well. So we're gradually going to shift this a little bit back towards cardioid to get mostly the ribbon mic going here, but just add in a little bit of that pressure omni just to slightly tuck in that low end and start to add in a little bit of brightness. Since we're still heavily leaning towards the ribbon side, I'm obviously still retaining a lot of that body, but it almost sounds like I just EQ'd this mic a little bit, where I'd typically do with the ribbon, where I'd roll out some low end and just boost the high end a little bit. So that sounds perfect to me. Let's listen to it one more time in this setting, and then I'll roll back to full ribbon so you can hear the difference going the other way. All right, let's roll it back towards fully ribbon. Best of both worlds. We're getting a lot of that ribbon body and the smooth high end, but gradually starting to add in a little bit of that omni, just tucked the proximity effect in perfectly and added just a little bit of brightness. And I'm not even halfway when I moved to the spot that I thought sounded perfect, which was about right here. If we're splitting the difference where we're halfway between ribbon, figure eight, and halfway between cardioid, it's not even halfway. I'm still leaning towards the ribbon a little bit. So really great as a tone shaper, just to, problem solve and fix things here and there when we're thinking of it less as changing the patterns and more as a tone shaper. The first time Mark came here to Mill Sounds, he brought pretty much everything he made and a few prototypes of some models that are going to be coming out. One of the things I realized really quickly was that his new pressure Omni mics that he's about to release sounded really good on my darker Kawaii grand piano. So I knew when I set up the MF08s, I was probably going to want to lean a little bit more towards Omni, especially for this song, because it's in a busier part of the song that probably just needs to punch through. So a little less body and a little bit more kind of open articulation would be, appropriate for this. So I split the difference and turned the pattern more towards omni. So we're halfway between omnidirectional and cardioid, leaning a little bit heavier on the pressure omni side of the MF08. Going into electric guitar, I knew that I was probably more interested in hearing the ribbon side of the MF08 than the pressure omni. I already have a few microphones that are like go-tos here at Mill Sounds for doing electric guitar, so I knew if I was ever going to use the MF08s on electric, probably going to lean more towards the ribbon side. So I started out in full ribbon, and then ended up just blending in a little bit of the pressure omni, not much. So most of this is ribbon, a little bit of the pressure omni sprinkled in, and then for bass as well. For bass guitar, this song needed a line in. It needed just a nice boomy, clean line in. So I'm blending that with the tone of the amp and giving it a little bit of dirt just to blend in. So electric guitar and bass for the MF08 files, we're going pretty much full figure 8, blending in just a little bit of the pressure omni. For vocals, I'm going to keep the MF08 and cardioid, and up till this point, I think pretty much everything you've heard, with maybe a handful of exceptions, has been the MF08 running into one of my AEA TRP preamps, just so you can have a really clean gain stage when you're doing comparisons and hearing the mic. I tried doing vocals with the AEA preamp, sounded really good. I didn't have like any harshness issues or anything. Out of curiosity, I tried running it on my vocal through my Locomotive Audio 40AM preamp. It's a very colorful tube preamp that's kind of based off the Gates and RCA preamps from the 1940s and 1950s with some like modern twists on it. Man, it just sounded really good through the Locomotive Audio, and even just in my headphones. When I did a take through the Locomotive Audio preamp, I sang better. So I tried in general to kind of keep the signal chain pretty clean on these mic demos, and I've done that up to this point, but this just sounded really good through the Locomotive Audio preamp on my vocal, so I ran with it. So just a heads up, it's running through a nice tube preamp at this stage. It happens faster than you think. Dogs go where they shouldn't be. You try your best to let them off the leash until the shadows strike them down. Now you've got to run. faster than you've ever run before. You've got to chase the clock more than you've ever known. You've got to run. As we move into drums, I kind of assume that the majority of the people that would be interested in the MF08s on drums would probably have them on overheads. So I do have them as a spaced overhead stereo set. What we're going to do is we're going to start out just hearing the two MF08s soloed, so just the two overhead mics, because we do have a few more Samar mics on the full kit, but we'll get to that in a minute. So we're going to hear the two MF08s in a spaced overhead configuration. They're pretty low. I'm going to start them out in cardioid, and then just to kind of show you the range, I also did a few takes and spliced them in so that you could hear them going from cardioid and then hear them going to omni and then going to figure eight, because you've got a lot of range to work with. Keep in mind that when I set these up, I felt like for this song they sounded really good in cardioid, so that's kind of what I stuck to, and I kind of did my final tweaks on the mics in cardioids in terms of where I placed them. I've got them both angled just a little bit off to the side, so in terms of the imaging and sound, they're kind of configured for cardioid, so when we switch to omni and figure eight, you might hear the image shift a little bit or something, but just listen for the tone more than the image, because obviously when you change polar patterns, especially when we get to figure eight, I would have totally rearranged these and put them in different spots and fine-tuned them if I was going to use them in figure eight as opposed to cardioid. So let's hear them soloed first. Now that you've heard the MF08 soloed as overheads, I want to go ahead and bring in everything else that I've got in terms of close mics and room mics, so you can hear everything in context all at once. There's no mixing. These are just all the mics flat. You're going to hear them all at once with everything together. If you want to hear the individual mics, download the session files and go through them. Let's see, what do we have? I've got two of the MG33s here, so I put one of them on snare top, which it sounds really good. I'm going to have to play around with that more. Really good snare top mic. I put the other MG33 that I had here on the rack tom. If I had a third one, I would have just put it on the floor tom, but I only had two of them. So on the floor tom, I've got one of Mark's AL95 ribbon microphones, and I've done a pretty severe high-pass filter on it just because I've got it pretty close to the tom, so we're filtering out a lot of low end. And then the other thing that I threw in is two of the Omni mics that are probably, 5 feet from the kit, but what I've done is I've put these dividers up front as well from GIK. So you've kind of got the dividers kind of splitting right between the mics and the kit, so it makes them sound a little bit more distant, but still added some body. Probably gonna add I'm gonna bake in a little bit of compression to those because the kit sounded great as is. It didn't really need anything, but I did want to throw in two mics just for the hell of it, and I figured if I'm gonna put room mics, I'd add some compression just so you can blend them in just for some energy. So MG33s on tom and snare top, AL95 on floor tom, and then two of the prototype Omni mics as room mics with some compression on them. You gonna sit with me, Mr. Awkward? Well, you're the one that wanted to come over. You want to lay down? Stop being awkward? Now that we've got the whole song recorded, don't forget that there are full session files available for download. Look in the video description for this. They'll be there. Download the full file, session files, play around with them. Now we're going to listen to the whole montage of the song. I've done a basic mix of it. When I get to this stage, I try not to overmix things, just do some really simple things, just so you can kind of hear things in a little bit more finished context with the files kind of processed with some EQ and compression and some stuff over the master bus. So let's check out the whole song. Walk along the water's edge, may reach out and touch you. Tread softly now, carry your gun. There's dangers all around you. Happens faster than you think. Dogs go where they shouldn't be. Try your best to let them off the leash, till the shadows strike them down. Now you've got to run faster than you've ever